Hello everyone, and welcome to this next video in the Foundation module. In this video on the Foundation project, I'm going to start working on the group system for our spawn points, because I want to be able to assign where the doors and where the bottom floor of our building is. And later on, when we're dealing with the balconies, we'll copy that system and use it for that too. So let's have a quick look in the example file. And what I want to build is this system here that first assigns a couple of groups based on the bottom section of our building. And you can see the groups are reflected as colors right here. And this will help us for two different things. One, we'll know where the doors should go, because we don't want doors in the middle of our walls here. Like for example, if we have our wall, we don't want a door to appear here. We might want to spawn on top of balconies later, but that's a whole different story. Instead, we want to make sure the doors always appear at the bottom floor of our structure. However, we do have this layer of gray area, gray concrete, that acts like the bottom facade of our building and will spawn a different set of tiles. Now to do this, we do need to have a second group called bottom floors specifically for that. That's the first thing we're going to set up. After this, we are going to have a look at grouping our points. So here we have an additional set of points specifically for the doors. And I want to create two different ways to set this up. One is going to be done using a range group. And this is basically a range where a door gets spawned every so many points. So if I have my point numbers, then right now it's set to spawn one door every 10 points. So here we have a door on point 50, on point 40, 30, 20, 10, etc. On the other hand, we have the ability to spawn our doors on a very specific set of point numbers. If we look at the bottom floor of our building, and only at the bottom floor of our building, like this here, we can see that the bottom floor of our building is made up out of points which each have a point number. We can use this point number to then give a very specific location where we want our doors to spawn. So if we want our doors to spawn on location, say 62 and 63, then we'll only have doors spawn here. And I want to be able to switch between those systems so we can choose which one we want to use, either a repeated pattern or a very specific location. So let's go ahead and start working on that. So over here in our scene, let's go ahead and start a new section. I'm going to grab a group by range node. And let's drop this one down. And if you recall from the Houdini 101 videos, the group by range node allows us to select a subset of our points or primitives based on a range selection. So in this case, what I want to do over here is switch it to point selection. And I'm going to call this one the bottom floors group. This is a group node, so I'm also going to color it green. And as for the settings, let's go ahead and switch this one over to start to end mode. And this is going to try to select all the points within the range that we specify. Now, if I increase my range, you'll see how the groups start to populate along the bottom of the building. And that's exactly what we wanted to do, right? Now, in this case, I want to grab all of the bottom floors that are going to be part of our outside wall section that's going to have the gray tiles. And I want to specify that over in my interface. So let's go ahead and open up the type properties. And in here, I want to create a new parameter called balconies start at floor. And this basically indicates where later on the balconies in our building are going to start. Now next, what we want to do is configure this parameter. So I'm going to set the lower range to be locked at 1, because we need at least one floor which has the doors, which has the bottom floor with no balconies. And then after that, we can set the top range at say 10, so that's fine. Under channels, let's make sure the default is also set to 1. And then I want to put this inside of a new folder specifically made for the balconies. And we'll deal with these much later, but since it is part of the interface, let's go ahead and create a new folder here. Drop it below the other folder, so it's right there. Don't drop it inside of this folder, like so. Just drop it onto the root, or drop it in between, so it sits right between the building settings and the setup folder. Then grab the balconies and drop it in there. So now that we have all of our folders organized, let's give this one a name. Okay, so with that, let's apply this. And now we have a new tab over here inside of our parameters. Alright, let's go ahead and start configuring this group by range node so we can select all the bottom floors. Let's select the group by range node, and up top I want to give it a name. So let's name this group the bottom floors group. Now from there, we need to automate the end range in order to select all the floors that we want to grab. Now to do that, we need to know how many tiles are actually in one floor. And we already have a way to do that. Up top, in our network, we have the extrude walls section. And this section already has everything we need. If we simply grab this node here and sample how many primitives are on it, we will know how many points are in the bottom group. So let's grab this reference, grab the name of the node, and then let's go over to our group by range node. And inside the end parameter, I'm going to type nprims. And nprims allows us to sample our primitive numbers on any given geometry. So like before in the previous video when I was sampling point numbers, nprims will sample primitive numbers and it will return them to you as a number. So in this case, I need to grab the isolate walls node from up top. And if I do this, it will now start selecting all the points of the bottom floor. Except of course, Houdini does start at 0 when it starts counting the elements in our geometry, so we need to reduce this by a value of 1. Right, so let's reduce this by 1. Okay, so with that set up, now we have the ability to increase the amount by simply multiplying this value here. If I add a multiplication at the very beginning of this nprims, like for example I said times 3, then it will first multiply these two together. So that's basic math priority, right? Multiplication and division goes before addition and subtraction. So in this case, if we have 3 times the total amount of elements on one level, and then we reduce this by 1, then we get the total amount of points for the bottom 3 floors. If we replace the 3 here with our parameter over there, we can do this by copying the parameter, and then go to the number value you want to replace, select it, and then right click and say paste relative reference right there. And now it will work. If we go ahead and grab our parameter, we can now select the entire bottom floor. So that's great, right? At this point we have everything that we need. Next, let's go ahead and turn this into an attribute so we can use it later as well as an attribute. I do want to have my groups, but some parts of our network will require it as attributes as well. So let's drop down an attribute create node. And I'll call this the attribute create for the bottom floors. Now, in order to make sure that we are actually only creating attributes on our points that are selected by our group, let's filter out the group up here, select bottom floors, and let's make sure we're selecting our point group. Then as for the attribute, let's call this one bottom floors as well. Turn it into an integer attribute. And under the value, I'm going to set it to 1. So now that we have the attribute ready, it will have appeared in our spreadsheet. So if I look at that and we scroll down, we can now see that some points have the bottom floors value as 1 and the other ones are at 0. And of course, if we go ahead and create a visualizer for it, we could also see it this way. Okay, so next, go ahead and copy this attribute create node, now that we have our bottom floors attribute. And I'm going to paste it right below. And then in here, I'm going to rename this one to tile ID for bottom floors. So this is going to be a separate attribute over here. It's going to be on the bottom floors group as well, but I'm going to call this one tile ID. And the tile ID is going to determine which type of tile spawns on the outside of our building. The system will get a little bit more complicated than that eventually, but for now, it's simply going to assign if we're going to get a bottom floor window, a bottom floor door, or a top floor window. So that's pretty straightforward. So with that, we now have this attribute and we can find it in our spreadsheet right here. All right, good. And then the last thing I want to do is create a specific group just for the bottom points, just for the bottom floor points. And we need this for the doors on the bottom floor. Otherwise, we don't know where they can spawn, or they might spawn up higher, right? So let's copy our group by range node and paste it in below. And let's rename this one to ground floor. Then next, up here, let's name this the ground floor group. Not ground floors, ground floor. Okay. And inside of the expression, let's remove the balcony start at floor part of the code. So we're only grabbing the number of primitives and then subtracting it by 1. Okay, so at this point, we have the bottom floor selected. We have a separate group for that. If I just change the color, make it a bit more visible. Then now we have two groups on this, the bottom floors group and the ground floor group. So let's grab these and let's put them inside of a netbox. And let's give it a name, such as set tile ID for bottom floors. Alright, so next let's go ahead and create a new group for our doors, so we know where our doors are going to be. And then I'm going to assign a new ID for those specifically. So the doors will have ID 2, whereas the bottom windows will have ID 1, and then the top floor windows will have ID 0. Let's go over here, and what I want to do is first create a group by range node again. Let's go ahead and grab this group ground floor node over here. And I will rename this one to door group. And the group itself, let's call this doors. And as for its selection, well, we know it needs to be created on the bottom floor, so that's fine. But then I want to change this part over here as well. So if I increase the total amount of points on the off parameter, you can see that it will start selecting 1 point out of every 10 points in this case. And if I move my offset around, then it will start circling around the building. And this works quite well. So we're going to use this. Let's go ahead and promote these parameters up to the top level. Let's open up the type properties. And next I want to create a new folder for these settings. This is going to be specifically for the doors and the windows. Let's grab a folder drop it in here above our balconies. And I'm going to call this one doors and windows. Then from our parameters here on the right, make sure you have the doors group selected and drag over the select parameter. And I'm going to name this one the door count. I'm just going to make sure that it has at least one door every so many units. It's no use having a value of 0. Otherwise our building won't have any doors at all. Then let's go over here and grab the off value as well. This I'm going to call the door interval. Let's give it a name too. And by default its value is set to 10, so that will work just fine. And then finally we have the offset as well. So I'm going to grab that, drag it over, and we'll call this one the door offset. And as for the door offset, well, we don't have to lock it at 0, but I am going to just keep its default value at 0 as well. This is only if we want to move the doors along the side of our building. So let's apply this. And now we should have the ability to select a certain amount of doors on our building. And that's working just fine. Now that we have this group, let's go ahead and update our tile ID for the doors. So let's grab our attribute create node up here that sets the tile ID. Copy that. And let's paste it in. And I'm going to filter it out for the doors group. So let's select doors and remove the bottom floors reference. And now we just need to make sure that we set the value for these doors to 2. And let's also name this one, of course, to be the tile ID for the doors. So now that we have this, let me visualize this value. In here, let's go to tile ID. And under the visualizer, I'm going to make sure the tile ID is visualized as a marker. And I'm just going to make it a bit bigger so we can see this a bit better. Maybe make it bright red. Yellow. Okay. So now you can see that the points at the bottom all have a value of 1. Then the points at the top have a value of 0. And where the doors are, where our doors group is, the points get a value of 2. So basically what I'm doing here is that when we start off, we don't have this attribute at all. Let me just hide all these elements. And then over here, we create the tile ID attribute using the attribute create node. Now the default value for this tile ID is 0. So whatever is not selected is going to be 0. Then after that, we override it with the doors group, and this becomes tile ID 2. Alright, pretty straightforward so far. Now with this, we already have a way to define our doors. But next, I also want to make sure I can set them up more manually. And this will require me to add a switch. But before I do that, let's go ahead and create the second method first. So for the second selection method, I want to create a pattern. And a pattern selection just basically selects whatever we have based on the point number in this case. And we can do this through a simple group node. If I grab a group node and I plug it into anything, and up here I can select, for example, just a selection of 10 points, 0 to 10. I do need to make sure it's actually set to points, of course. Then it will select all the points on the bottom floor. Okay, that's simple enough. Then next I can add to this selection by, say, adding point 15, point 18 to 20, and point 23. Then Houdini will go ahead and select all of these points based on that selection. And we can use this particular syntax to select our parts of the building. So if I put this at the top of my tool, it will work the same way. Now I don't want to actually be able to select the upper floors here. And for that, what I want to do is isolate out just the bottom floor. So I can only select those points. So let's go ahead and create a blast node. Now up here, we have the ground floor group. Let's go ahead and filter out our points using that. And then let's set it to delete non-selected. So this will select only our bottom points, so we can use those. Next, let's grab our group node. And I'm gonna color this one green and this blast node red. And I'll call this one the isolate ground floor. And as for the group node, I will call this one the group doors pattern. Now we can go ahead and grab the base pattern and promote that to our interface as well. So let's open up the type properties again, grab this and drag it in. And I'll put it below the others. So drop it onto the doors and windows folder. And as for the name, let's call this the door pattern. Now, since this is actually a string value, we can't set a range. This is going to be a string field. And if I apply this, it's actually going to copy what we had over here inside of our base group. I don't want these default values, so under the channels, I'm just going to remove this and set it to 0 by default. So it will only select point 0. Now, over here in my pattern, I can go ahead and specify whatever we want to type, right? Now you'll notice that this particular parameter actually comes with the buttons on the right that were also present on our group node. And these are actually being written by a couple of scripts inside of the type properties window. So let's go ahead and remove these elements. And to do that, we have to open up the type properties again. And then under the door pattern, we have to change this button here so it doesn't use a menu. Now the menu is currently being written using a small script that reads the current amount of groups or the group names present on this node. I don't want this, so by turning it off, it will remove that menu. Next, we have the action button section here. And I'm just going to remove this code because it's not working here, because this isn't on a group node and it's just going to error out if we click on it. If we apply that, then the arrow disappears as well. So now we have this. We can simply select parts of our geometry based on a group selection and it will work, right? Okay, so now that we have our group pattern, let's go ahead and transfer this back onto our building. Because in order to make sure that we didn't select too much with our group pattern node, I deleted a part of my group. So I need to actually put it back onto our main set of points, right? I don't want to remove all my points. Now I could fix this by grabbing the isolate ground floor node, copy this, and then simply flip around its delete non-selected state. And then I can grab a merge node and merge these together. Over here I have my group node. Let's make sure this one says doors as well. But in this case, I want to use this particular network for other stuff as well. So I'm going to show you a different method on how we can recombine these different points together. So I'm going to get rid of this. And instead, I'm going to use a group transfer node. And we want to group the points, of course, that are coming from our building here. So let's grab these and plug those into the first input. And then the group I want to grab comes from this section here, which is the isolated set of points. So we grab that and plug it into the second input. Now by default, this is going to transfer every single group that's present on these points, and it's going to try and transfer it onto here. So I'm going to change this around. I'm going to disable all the primitive and edge groups, and then only filter out the door groups from here. Next, if there's a naming conflict, so if there are two conflicting groups, I also want to make sure that I override this group. Now at this point, what we have is our group is being transferred from the bottom of this building. And let me just make this a bit cleaner. So we're going to isolate out just the doors and maybe hide some of these elements here. Okay, so you can see how the groups are being transferred up from the bottom down here, up about 10 meters. And that's because of the distance that we've set. Now we could specify, in this case, a very small range, like 0.01. And considering these points will always be in the same place, this will work. This will mean that we'll only have the doors on the bottom floor. But I'm going to do this slightly differently. Again, there are always multiple ways in Houdini, and while this is definitely a great way to do it for the bottom floor doors, I do want to prepare you a little bit for the later part of the lecture, where we're going to deal with the balconies. So I'm actually going to do this a slightly different way. Let's disable the distance threshold. And what this will do is it will transfer the group from the nearest location up along the building. And because of this is something that we have to fix. Now we can fix this using a group combine node. Now if you recall, we do actually have a ground floor group right here. And if we were to grab a group combine node, then we can use this group combine node to filter out only the doors points that are at the very bottom of our building that are intersecting with our ground floor. So we make a little bit of space here. And what I want to do is I want to write out to the doors group, and then I want to say the doors group is the current doors group, okay, intersecting with the ground floor group. And what this will now do is it will make sure that we'll only have points on the bottom floor. Now, in case you followed the Houdini 101 videos, you might recall that the group combine node actually comes with some issues. Mainly that if the doors or ground floor group here weren't to exist, the node is likely to error out. So let's say I change the name of my doors group here to doors2, which is not actually an existing group. It will actually cause the node to error out and throw us an error saying doors2 is not a valid group. And we need to bypass this issue. So I'm just going to return this back to doors, so it doesn't error out. But to prevent this issue from happening, what we need to do is initialize our group ahead of time. So if we look in the info panel, we can see that we have our doors group right here. Now groups don't actually need to have active elements in there. We could have groups present on our geometry with all elements currently deactivated. So we'll have a group with 0 elements in it. And that is what I call a dummy group. So let's go ahead and create an attribute wrangle node. Let's grab these two channels and plug those in below and plug it in directly to the ground floor node here. Now inside of this attribute wrangle, what I want to do is simply call up my doors group. I can do that by typing @group underscore and then doors. And then because it's vex, let's add a semicolon as well, so we terminate the line. Now in this case, I haven't actually specified a on or off state, or a 0 or 1 state, after the group variable was called. And when you do that, you basically create a doors group, or a group in general, without any values in it. So this is a dummy group, it's an empty group, but with that, our group combine node is actually not going to error out at all. Now I'm going to go ahead and name this node the dummy group node, because this is going to contain not just our doors group, but later on also dummy groups for our balconies as well. And then I'm going to color it blue, because this one creates a placeholder group that I don't want to remove. I need this to be here. And let's also give some names to these ones as well. So the transfer group is going to be called the transfer doors from nearby points. And the group combine node I'll call the intersect with bottom floors. So let's make sure that this is working. Over here I have my doors group. Okay, so let's test it out. Here I have my doors pattern. Let's go ahead and change this to say 12 to 20. And as you can see, it is working. So that's good. So that is this part done. We can now select our patterns and let's move on to the next part. Alright, so at this point we have our two group methods right here. We can select them by pattern and we can select them by the range. Now I want to be able to switch between those, and to do that I can use a switch node. Let's grab a switch node, and the switch node allows me to grab any of the inputs that are coming into it, and I can select which one through this number slider here. So if I plug in these nodes and connect them up to my attribute create down here, then by switching around the switch over here on the right, we will select which group node we're using. Now I do want to expose this to the top level of my interface. So let's go ahead and open up the type properties again. And just make sure I still have my parameter panel, because this one keeps disappearing on me. And then let's go ahead and promote this switch up to the doors and windows folder as well. So I'm going to grab the parameter from the top right and drag it in over here. And by default, this is going to be an integer. So if I apply this, it will be here as an integer, right? I want to change this to an ordered menu. So in here, first let me give this a name. I'll call this one door mode. Then under the type, I'm going to change this to an ordered menu down here. And then under the menu setting, we can add a couple of values for this ordered menu, for this switch. So the first value is going to be 0, and then we're going to call this one by range. And then the second one will be 1, and I'll call this one by pattern. So if I accept this, apply it, then now we have this toggle button up here. And if we flip it, then the switch will flip. Now right now it's actually reversed. I've actually plugged in the pattern in the wrong end. Right now it's set to range, but it's selecting the pattern. So we can easily flip that around by flipping it up here, click the bottom arrow, and it will move it up and move them around. You can also see that by the connections, by the way. It's pretty straightforward. Now I'm going to call this switch the door mode switch. And then what I want to do is on my interface, depending on which current mode I have selected, I want to hide the parameters that I'm not using. So let's go back to my type properties again. And under here, let's grab the door mode parameter name. I'm going to copy that. And then under door count, under the hide when condition, let's go ahead and type 2 curly brackets, open and close it. And then I'm going to paste in my door mode parameter name. And then say if not equal to 0. So exclamation mark equals means it's not equal to 0. So in other words, if this switch is set to 1 or not 0, then this parameter is going to hide itself. Let's go ahead and copy this and paste it into the other ones as well. And as for the door pattern, I'm going to inverse this, so let's put it in. And instead I'm going to say if door mode is not equal to 1. And then we can simply accept that or apply it, and you can see how it works. If we select by range, only these parameters are visible. And if we select by pattern, then only the door pattern is visible. Alright, so at this point we are ready with this part of the lecture. I'm quickly going to clean up my network here. Grab the dummy group, put that in a net box. Let's make it blue, and I'm going to call this one the backup groups. Then I'll grab the bottom section down here, put this into another net box as well. This is going to be the doors group. And just to keep it a bit cleaner, let's grab this line. I'll add a dot in there by pressing the Alt key and then clicking on it. And then I can drag the other line onto that. Then I'm just going to move it into this net box as well. And here on the left, I have my group nodes for the pattern. I'm going to wrap these into another net box. So again, press Shift O, and I'm going to drag this down. Alright, so at this point, we have enough information to start using this with our tile system. So up here, we now have our groups for our bottom floors, the doors and the ground floor, and we can configure it through the interface. And then next to that, we can also find the tile ID, if we look that up, for every one of our points. So this will allow us to assign properly which tile we want to load. And with that information, in the next video, let's go ahead and expand our little tiling system that we built last time. So let's plug this in. And now if I go ahead and show the tile data in here, you can see that we now have the tile ID available, as well as the corner and bottom floors attribute. So we have a lot more information available now than we had last time, and this should allow us to make much more detailed tiles in our system. So we can actually make the different shapes for our building and assign them to the right places. So let's go ahead and do that in the next video. Now at this point, don't forget to save your scene and save your asset as well. And then in the next video, let's continue with the wall tiles. So thanks for watching this video and have a good one.